so happy, my old friend. I'm glad you've manifested yourself into a human I can depend on to bring me happy. Ooh. Thank you, happy.
Hello? Hello? Anyone here? Bass! Lili! Did we get canceled? Maybe the Borg attacked, assimilating everyone, and now I'm the only one left. Hey, that means I get to be the show's only host now!
Raj, what's the matter? Haven't you ever heard of a transporter before?
Well, don't mind him, Bryan. He's just upset because we left so quickly last time. He thinks we left him all alone last time when we departed very quickly for Earth for the interview.
We'll check in with Raj just a little bit later. You know, it feels like we've had a long off season and a lot of developments have transpired. Lili and I are just returning from a vacation, a relaxing one on Pacifica, then onto a quick stop on Earth for our last week's interview with Scotty Baker. Now, thanks to a friend of mine, Captain Chip of the Federation starship Crescendo, he offered to take us on as passengers so we could arrive back here at our home on the USS Orus just in time to get this full top 10 episode for our season started.
Ooh, that's right, Bryan. I'm so excited. And thank you, Captain. We are in your debt.
Indeed.
Now, let me get you up to speed on what's developed during our season break. The new shows Prodigy and Strange New Worlds are kicked off, plus second seasons were announced prior to their first episodes even airing. We're in for loads of Star Trek with no break on Paramount+.
Yes, and I'm still holding out for that Michael Dorn series, hoping that Michael Dorn can convince the studio execs to pick up his Captain Worf series so there's even more Star Trek.
We always want more.
Absolutely.
I just said I hope they do too. I would love to see that.
Yes, I think I got that last part at the end where he said Kapla.
Ooh, Bryan, there's so much exciting news, and we'll be sure to keep you all up to date with the 5 new series and news as it breaks.
Absolutely. 5 series, can you believe it? 5 Star Trek series. We will. Now let's get to our top 10 list that epitomizes the best episodes of Star Trek.
Yes, that's exactly what we're gonna do. Let's begin with episode number 10. We're back in 1993, and something has happened in the world of Trek that has never happened before and has changed the landscape of the franchise forever.
Yeah, Lili, I think I know what you're talking about. January 3rd, that is the day that a new series premiered.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In the series premiere episode, Emissary, not to be confused with the TNG episode of the same name, we embark upon a journey with Commander Benjamin Sisko, who is being transported to his new assignment, preparing the planet Bajor for admittance into the Federation.
The Enterprise is transporting him and his son from the previous posting at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards to Station Deep Space Nine, previously known as Terok Nor during their Cardassian occupation of Bajor before their liberation. It
is worth noting that at the beginning of the episode, we see a scene of Commander Sisko as the first officer of the Saratoga, where he served during the Borg incursion of Wolf 359.
Yes, during this battle, Sisko loses his wife Jennifer and is now responsible to raise his young son Jake alone. Sisko develops a disdain for the Borg. However, Sisko vows to the restored Captain Picard that he will carry out the job on Deep Space Nine.
Very tense. This is the essence of the utopian future of Star Trek, that we've outgrown our need for revenge or conflict, and now humans have a more evolved sensibility.
Sisko seeks the guidance of Kaiopaka, the Bajoran religious faith, in order to unite the people for their admittance into the Federation. In the process, he embarks on a journey that changes the course of Bajor and himself discovering the Celestial Temple, the first stable wormhole known to exist. This links the Alpha Quadrant to the distant Gamma Quadrant 70,000 light years away, Lili.
Our next episode deals with truth, justice, and the American way.
Well, you didn't forget that this is a Star Trek talk show, not Superman, right?
Right, and I am referring to the original series episode, The Omega Glory.
Oh, that's right. I almost forgot a little piece of Americana that Gene Roddenberry, so nicely tucked into this episode when dealing with a race of Yangs looked down upon by the Combs. This was shorthand of the current political turmoil that was at the forefront of the news back in the 1960s and commented heavily on the Cold War between Russia and the U.S.
Yes, the Yangs in this episode were symbolic of the Yankees, the Americans from the Civil War, and the Combs were representative of the oppressive communist state.
Many people don't know that this episode was one of the original 3 scripts written to be pitched for the second series pilot of Star Trek, the original Star Trek series.
What makes this episode great, though, is that we get to see how important the morals and principles are to our crew. When Kirk is confronted by a fellow captain, Ronald Tracy, who's found to be in clear and blatant, willful violation of regulations by interfering with the planet's culture, giving weapons and asserting his authority over the inhabitants, favoring one side over another, Kirk gives a stern dressing down in his captain's log.
Oh, yes. Now, a Starfleet captain's most solemn oath is that he will give his life, even his entire crew, rather than violate the Prime Directive.
We also get to bear witness to some of Spock's character development in terms of abilities.
Oh, yes, the Vulcan nerve pinch, right? Mm-hmm. And the telepathic powers to implant a suggestion during the fight to the death between Captains Kirk and Tracy.
That's right. This was a pivotal scene, and I really like the line delivered by Dr. McCoy when he tells Spock that in a fight between good and evil, his experience tells him that evil usually triumphs unless good is very, very careful.
And indeed, good did win as Kirk defeated Captain Tracy, although sparing his life, and was able to recite the holy words of the Yangs, which turned out to be from our American Constitution, Pledge of Allegiance, and even verses from the Holy Bible.
We close out the episode with an admonition from Kirk to all the people of the planet that these words are meant to be seen and read by all. They must apply to everyone or they mean nothing. And finally, before departing the planet Omega 4, he imparts this wisdom. Liberty and freedom have to be more than just words. Beautiful.
It is. Our number 8 episode on our countdown comes from Season 3 of Star Trek Enterprise in an episode entitled Similitude. In this episode, a tragic accident threatens Commander Charles Trip Tucker III. The captain has to decide whether to take up Dr. Phlox's recommendation to clone Trip just to use him for organic harvesting. There's
serious moral and ethical implications in a decision like this, and in the end, Captain Archer decides to go ahead with the procedure. What would you have done in that position, Brian?
You know, that's a really tough decision, Lily, but one of the underlying tenets that this episode touches on is the axiom, the good of the many outweighs the good of the few.
Or the one.
Great Spock line, right? Mm-hmm. Scott Bakula's Captain Archer has to decide that he's fighting for the continued existence of Earth at the threat of annihilation from the Xindi. And I agree with the decision, even though during the course of the clone's shortened lifespan, whose name becomes Sim, begins to develop the same memories as the real Trip. This creates a real conflict that tests the moral character and guiding principles of Captain Archer.
I also love how there's a lot of character development and backstory that we get with Trip and Sim.
Precisely. The actor they got to portray Trip did a phenomenal job, the young Trip.
Well, did it happen or did it not happen? That is the question that now preoccupies our minds this fine evening, wouldn't you say, BK?
Where are you going with this, Lily?
Well, I'm going into our next episode, number 7, The Year of Hell.
Aha, that Voyager episode, I do remember.
Yes. Brian, what is that?
This? You wanted to talk about this Voyager episode, right?
Yes.
Well, in this case, Voyager data. We're talking about this episode, so we have all our data here for Year of Hell. Let's talk about it.
Oh my gosh, BK. You know, sometimes I don't know. I don't know about you. All right. Year of Hell deals with the paradoxes of time travel. Anarax of the Crenum Imperium makes calculations and constructs a ship that can alter the course of a single molecule or an entire civilization, causing it to be erased from history.
This time the ship goes around this part of the quadrant, making changes to the timeline with the goal of restoring full power to the Crenum. However, in the course of doing so, one severe miscalculation causes Anarax to lose his wife.
Voyager develops a new astrometric lab and have plotted a new, more efficient course home thanks to newly acquired crew member 7 of 9. However, when they enter Krenim space, they become victims of Anorax's ever-changing timeline.
Voyager develops temporal shielding, which protects them from the chronoton torpedoes being used against them. This puts a major crimp in Anorax's mission. Janeway is able to fight them off, but not before Chakotay and Paris are abducted as relics.
Part 2 picks up with Voyager very badly damaged and hiding in a nebula. The primary crew has abandoned the ship and only the senior officers remain. Janeway decides it's time to go in search of allies to help fight the Krenim.
While this is going on, Paris is forging relationships with the crew, trying to stage a mutiny, and Chakotay is nearly convinced by Anorax to join his endeavor of manipulating the timeline. Now, in the end, Paris succeeds in an attempt to take down the temporal shielding, and in concert with Janeway and her assembled fleet. We see an amazing shot, Lily, of a battered Voyager smashing to the side of the ship, and time resets.
Beautiful shot, which begs the question, did this really happen?
That's a good question. You know what? I see now. I get it. And that's a very valid question, Lily. This is the second time now that there's been an alternate timeline for this Voyager crew involving the Krenim. The first was foreshadowed in the 3rd season episode Before and After. Remember, it's a Kess episode where an aging Kess is traveling back through time after having died in the future.
One can't help but wonder if this was the same time frame, another reality, or if it never even happened at all.
What are you doing on Romulus? You may assure your superiors, Captain, that I am here on a personal mission of peace, and I will advise Starfleet when it is appropriate.
Now, episode 6 is a strong showing of the series Star Trek Discovery, as we're discussing here. It was an episode titled Unification Part 3, and it picks up from the Next Generation Parts 1 and 2 episode, in a sense. Now, we see the far future nearly a millennium away from what we were used to considering our regular Star Trek time frame, where Leonard Nimoy's Spock has finally succeeded in his efforts to reunite the Vulcan and Romulan races.
Although this topic is such a minor part of the episode, it goes to show how peace and diplomacy can lead to a better future for all to get along, which I believe was the most important lesson that Gene Roddenberry wanted to convey with his creation of the whole show.
Ambassador Spock, circa stardate 45825. Coordinates redacted. Retrieved from classified archive. The personal files of Admiral Jean-Luc Picard.
Closed minds have kept these two worlds apart for centuries. We can either choose to live with that enmity or seek a way to change it. The union of the Vulcan and the Romulan people will not be achieved by politics or by diplomacy. But it will be achieved. Like the first Vulcans, these people are struggling toward a new enlightenment. And it may take decades or even centuries for them to reach it, but they will reach it.
This episode deals with Commander Michael Burnham having to use diplomacy to remind the people of Navarre, the new name for the reunited Vulcan and Romulan planet, that the core principle of the Federation was to coexist peacefully and share ideas.
In order to accomplish this task, Burnham must look inside herself and overcome her own fears and faults. Navarre, the Vulcan-Romulan homeworld, has officially rejoined the Federation, which is led by human, Bajoran, and Cardassian hybrid president, Rilak. Burnham's abilities as a leader help secure Navarre's return, and Saru becomes closer with the Vulcan leader, President T'Rina.
Yes, the moral of this story is that if you cannot accept your mistakes, you cannot learn from them and work to improve yourself or your culture. We also get a great callback and the use of the Next Generation footage of Ambassador Spock that was neatly woven into the storyline.
It really was. It probably elicited a few emotions from the fan base as well. Did your eyes tear up, Brian?
Maybe a little.
No, you got emotional. It's Spock. What?
I did.
A captain's log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to A Captain's Log. We're now entering our top 5 best episodes. We're spreading around the love through all the iterations of Star Trek, aren't we?
Without this episode, there would have never been another Star Trek made. In fact, this episode was lost and really never made. Roddenberry showed it around to Star Trek convention audiences in the 1970s and up into the mid-1980s until it was finally released. There's a black and white plus an all-color version.
Are you referring to the very first pilot episode, The Cage?
You know your Star Trek, Lily. Yes. Now, you may not know this, Lily, but the whole reason why this particular episode was made was because the studio executives actually tried to sabotage the series.
No way! Tell us about it.
Well, once NBC decided to produce a pilot, the powers that be didn't really believe in Gene Roddenberry's creation, or more to the point, that this show could be a successful series. So out of a total of 5 scripts that had been pitched, this was the one that they chose because they felt it would have been too difficult to pull off for the acting, special effects, and set design. But it all started with this episode, The Cage, our 5th best episode that embodies the spirit of Star Trek.
Here we receive a distress call to the planet Talos 4. The captain, Pike, not Kirk originally, decides that the mission they were currently on was more important until he hears later that there were survivors.
This is where our sense of morals comes into play, with Pike altering course because of even the possibility to help someone out. Perfect Star Trek is defined here. We see through the bridge crew that there's diversity, and for the first time, such as the 1960s when civil rights and women's activism was still in its infancy, a woman was in a position of power in the command center seat on the bridge of the Enterprise.
We even got to see the first officer who shows compassion to an alien race despite the fact that they kidnapped their crew, which of course showcases the idea that humans have grown out of revenge and animosity.
Yes, now one of my favorite scenes in this episode is when we see a rough version of Mr. Spock. Now, granted, before his character was fully developed, we actually get to see him smiling and laughing when he beams down to the planet and is inspecting the local blue leaf flora.
It's so out of character to see him smiling and laughing.
It is.
Well, the show Discovery was still 50 years away from production when Mr. Spock was created, but there was a successful attempt by actor Ethan Peck to portray the evolution of his Spock from this time frame into what would eventually become the original series version of Spock. We even got to see them return to the planet Talos 4 in the Season 2 Discovery episode, If Memory Serves.
Yes, now, well, if my memory serves, they were both terrific episodes that occurred on the Forbidden Talos planet, which was Talos 4, Smiling Spock and all. We're returning to the Academy for our next episode, The First Duty. The Enterprise is called back to Earth for Captain Picard to give the commencement address for the graduating cadets. While en route, they receive a message that there's been an accident that involves a team of cadets.
Wesley Crusher is a cadet on that team, and now a formal inquiry has been convened to investigate the incident. Another member of this team is a cadet named Nicholas Locarno, played by Robert Duncan McNeil, who became the helmsman Tom Paris on Star Trek Voyager just 3 seasons later. Different characters, same personality almost. We love them both.
We do.
Well, we'll always have Tom Paris.
Great point. And episode title. Now, getting back to the episode at hand, during the investigation of the crash, the team of cadets conspire to hold back the truth about what had really happened, as they were afraid of the implications for attempting a shuttle maneuver that's banned.
The Covert Starburst maneuver? Involving 5 ships igniting the plasma exhaust of each other as they cross paths, passing within 10 meters of each other. This stunt, which was last attempted more than 100 years prior, resulted in the death of all pilots when it failed. No wonder it was banned.
Wesley ends up doing the right thing in the end and confesses to Admiral Brand, Commandant of the Academy, fully prepared to accept the repercussions of his actions.
Among the cadets that were members of Nova Squad, Cito Jaxa made an appearance in this episode, and she was also in the later episode. It was the Next Generation episode, Lower Decks, played by Shannon Phil.
Oh, right, Lower Decks! I love that show. I'm so glad that it got into this showcase. You know, because it's an animated show.
Raj, first of all, we are talking about the episode Lower Decks from The Next Generation, not the animated series Lower Decks. Now go back to your lower deck before you get tossed out in airlock.
And Lily used to be my favorite.
We begin our top 3 with another Next Generation episode, this time from the first season of the series. This episode features 2 returning alumni from the silver screen, Kirk's son David and Khan's right-hand man Joachim.
Of course, they're not playing the same roles again, but it is interesting that they're back in the same episode not too long after they played together in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Yes, my favorite film. Indeed, Lily. And in case you viewers have not guessed the episode yet, it's Symbiosis. This episode deals with a social commentary and a warning to all about the dangers and perils of drug use and addiction. It's a highlight of how Gene Roddenberry wanted to use his show, Star Trek The Next Generation, to bring awareness to a difficult topic that doesn't get discussed very often or easily brushed aside by society.
Here we start with the Enterprise exploring a star system where the sun is undergoing massive solar flare activity and begins to mess with the ship's circuitry and sensors. It's a nice touch of special effects that were used during the opening scenes, and although a bit dated now by today's amazing technological standards, to blot out the sun on the view screen.
I remember that scene. Now on to the story plot. A distress call is received from a ship whose navigation is failing and is about to crash on the planet Onara after a long debacle in which it kind of seems that the crew of the freighter is completely incompetent to operate their own vessel. They are finally beamed aboard with their cargo with what they claim to be a medication called Felicium.
There was quite a fight between the Onarans, who were led by actor Merritt Buttrick as T'Jon, and the Brekkians, who were also saved from the freighter, represented by Judson Scott's character Sobi. The dispute? Who was the rightful owner of the cargo?
It was discovered by Dr. Beverly Crusher that it was not medicine at all, but a powerful narcotic drug that no longer was needed. The symptoms shown by the Onarans was not a disease which could have been cured generations ago, but withdrawal from their addiction.
Dr. Crusher, who has sworn a medical oath to heal, was at odds with her oath as a Starfleet officer to uphold the Prime Directive. Also, a very moving scene by Lieutenant Tasha Yar with Wesley, explaining how drugs make you feel good at the time, but after a while it wears off and then you feel badly.
In the end, Picard's solution was to withhold all aid from both parties. This way, they would discover on their own that they were not sick any longer and could overcome their addiction.
A captain's log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to A Captain's Log.
Our episode is from the second season of Star Trek The Next Generation and is considered by many to be the first greatest episode of the series. Scotty Baker last week actually commented it was his favorite.
The Measure of a Man was written by Melinda Snodgrass, who drew on her background as a lawyer to write this episode. And it was, in fact, her first writing credit for Star Trek. She would later become a producer and story editor, also writing next-gen episodes Up the Long Ladder, The Ensigns of Command, and The High Ground.
These are all great episodes. The episode The Measure of a Man opens up with a visit from Admiral Nakamura, who informs Picard that Commander Bruce Maddox was here to work on his android Data. Maddox then proposes that he is attempting to create another android like Data, but he needs to study it and take it apart so that he can learn how to replicate the work of Dr. Noonien Soong.
Ooh, it. Naturally, this did not sit well with Captain Picard, and he decides to fight the order by advising Data to resign his commission as a Starfleet officer.
And this escalates to a legal fight about the status of Data's rights and whether he is his own person or the property of Starfleet. All the stops were pulled as a court trial was convened, and Commander Riker was shanghaied into being the prosecuting attorney in this episode.
In essence, the very morals and guiding principles of the Federation itself were hanging in the balance. As Picard so rightly argued,
Your Honor, Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits. Waiting.
A convincing argument.
It is. And it's interesting to note that this issue did arise only a year later in the third season episode, The Offspring, where Data creates a daughter, Lal, and again, another Admiral, Haftel, thinks that he has proprietary rights to take his child away from him because he doesn't think Data is fit to be a parent.
He's a great parent.
He is.
And again, in another episode titled Author, a 7th season Voyager episode, we pretty much deal with a similar thing, rights of an artificial intelligence, in this case, the EMH played by the great Dr. Robert Picardo.
Star Trek seems to be more accepted and popular. However, because of that stigma during our original review of episodes, this one was very nearly missed, and it wasn't until a late production meeting that this Dark Horse episode was brought up. The very first episode of Star Trek Enterprise was entitled Broken Bow, and it is our #1 episode.
Fascinating. Who would have thought that as the beginnings of humanity's foray into the stars? We were not a perfect human culture in the story, but that was the point of the rating system. It showed the great strides how we stick to our morals and principles to get where we are in the 22nd century of Star Trek.
Captain Jonathan Archer, who we see as a kid trying to understand his father Henry and how he deals with situations out of his control that frustrate him.
Yes, from there we begin to gather the crew that will make up the senior staff of the Enterprise NX-01, being introduced to the great characters, to Paul, Trip, Linguist Hoshi, all of whom have a spotlight on their department and a brief line or two about their past and what brought them aboard for this voyage.
As for the plot, we find ourselves from the viewpoint of a Midwestern farmer having first contact face-to-face with a new species never before seen by humans, but a race of warriors very near and dear to my heart. Be sure you tune in next time for A Captain's Log.
Hello, happy, my old friend. I'm glad you've manifested yourself into a human I can depend on to bring me happy. Ooh.